Prime Minister Mark Carney and his Liberal government are looking to set a new course after what some saw as an unlikely election victory late last month. But his new cabinet selections and the fact his government won't be tabling a budget have left a lot of political watchers scratching their heads. I'm Dave Breckenridge, and this is 10-3. National Post columnist Tasha Kheiriddin joins me to discuss the biggest looming challenges for the Carney government, what to make of his cabinet picks, and what Canadians can take away from the fact that we won't see a budget this year. Don't forget you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon Music. I'd love it if you could leave us a rating, a review, and tell your friends about the show. So Tasha, it's been a little over 2 weeks since Mark Carney's Liberals snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, winning a fourth mandate. And while there's already been a lot of talk and ink spilled about what went into that victory, I guess setting the stage for some of the developments this week, coming out of the vote, what did you see as kind of the biggest things that Mark Carney needed to address now that he had a mandate?
Well, the first one is obviously the situation with the United States. And we saw him go and visit Donald Trump in his first week in office, which I think was the right thing to do. I think it went well as it could have been. And following that, he now has to, move forward with a plan to get the tariffs removed, get those negotiations going to do so, get CUSMA renegotiated, all those things. So to put that plan together, he obviously had to appoint his cabinet, which he's now done. And we can talk a bit about those appointments. But the other big thing on his agenda is national unity. And that is going to be a big issue because of Alberta's, the goal of some Albertans to have a referendum on separation, the issues with oil and gas development, and the fact this government looks like it's probably going to continue most of the policies of the previous one in that score. So this is of concern. And I think those are the main issues that Carney will deal with. He also, internal economy things, wanting to liberalize trade between provinces. That is happening. We saw Ontario and Manitoba sign a deal just this week to liberalize trade between them, but dropping those internal barriers. I think that will be less of a difficulty for him. I think it's something he has to do. But it's going to happen because there's a willingness to do so. It's the other two issues where there's less willingness on either the U.S. side, perhaps, or the Albertan side, where he's going to have problems.
All right. As you mentioned, Alberta is a piece of this conversation. And there's a lot of concerns about what's going on in Alberta right now. Not only did Premier Danielle Smith list a host of demands she wants to see met, some in the Conservative movement out west have taken things a step farther and are pushing a referendum on separation. And I guess focusing more on Smith, as that's an individual with whom Mark Carney wants to have a relationship. What do you make of Smith's push for policy changes from the Carney government?
I think that she's doing her job in terms of standing up for the concerns that Alberta has regarding Ottawa. I think she is also, though, dealing with internal issues because it's clear that within her party, I've heard polling as high as 65% of people are in favor, if not of a referendum, in favor of separation. So she's dealing with a base that is very much interested in moving along that track. And so she's got to pay attention to that. She does not want the same fate to fall as Jason Kenney. And so staying in line with her base, but at the same time pressuring Carney is the way to do that. The problem is when she says that, she's not in favor of separation, but she's in favor of holding a referendum if that's what people want. People read into that and say, is she talking out of both sides of her mouth? Does she really believe that? This is the danger. This is the difficulty because the fires this will inflame. I mean, I lived through the Quebec 2 referenda. I was very young for the first one, but I vividly remember the second. And it is a very, very difficult place to go. You end up in all these conversations about, things are as arcane as passports and money. And the business climate gets very nervous. House prices declined significantly in Quebec, stagnated afterwards even for years because of the referendum situation, because uncertainty is not something anybody likes when they're making major purchases or investing in things. So I think that, I don't know if she's fully aware of that she's opened this Pandora's box. But talking to Mark Carney is something she has to do. The question is, how far does this go before you can't put the genie back in the bottle? And that's my concern here, is that people in the rest of Canada will get very fed up with Alberta. And like they did with Quebec, and that's where things can start to go sideways.
And for Carney, he has to walk a bit of a tightrope here, as you say, people in the rest of Canada may get upset with Alberta, and a lot of his support is concentrated in areas that are perhaps less sympathetic to some of Alberta's concerns. So how much ground can he give to Alberta? And I guess the bigger question is, do you think he will?
Well, I was looking to his cabinet picks to see what that would look like, and the West is very low in terms of numbers, sheer numbers, only 8 in the extended cabinet, only 4 in the main cabinet of 28 people, and 8 in the extended cabinet of secretaries of state. Now, it's true he didn't have as many MPs to choose from, but still, Quebec got 9 overall. It is much more represented. I think it has 7 in the main cabinet. And so it's clear that the West did not get the representation, perhaps, that would have made it easier to say that they're part of the core decision making that he has. On top of that, some of his picks, including the energy minister, Mr. Hodgson, hails from Ontario, is a background in electrification, not in oil and gas. He said he's going to the West. That's his first stop, is coming out to the West to talk to people, because he knows that that's a huge piece, obviously, of the energy puzzle. Julie DeBrusen, the environment minister, also is known as someone who's not friendly to the oil and gas economy, and not a fan of plastics, not a fan, of a lot of the things. I think that there's a difference of opinion on in Alberta versus the rest of the country, or in the West in general. So I'm a little worried about that, because the signals he could have sent didn't really get sent. I think he's going to have to make up for that somehow, in terms of, does Hodgson, for example, strike a working group or a committee to deal with or move forward on pipelines? And does that have very heavy Western representation? Who else could he call on in the West that could be part of that exercise, even if they're not in government? I think he's got to do that, because otherwise the only voices that will be out there will be the premier and people representing Alberta, and people who are angry in Alberta about the situation. He's got to find positive voices who say they want to work with Ottawa from the West, that will be constructive, but will still defend the West's interests in those conversations.
Do you think it's helpful that his former environment minister now moved into a different role with more of a focus on Quebec, I suppose, is still has the voice that he does in the public sphere? Stephen Guilbeault this week even was kind of speaking in a way that seemed to run counter to some of the things that Mark Carney campaigned on, and also counter to what the new natural resources minister had to say.
Yeah, I heard that. He went on about peak oil or peak natural gas by 2028, 2030, and after that it's a decline. And, the kind of rhetoric that, honestly, I think Albertans and a lot of people who think the industry is important and disagree with his assessment just make them roll their eyes and go, "Oh no." He was on the front bench of at the swearing in of the people who are core to the cabinet, because Carney is running a core cabinet model where he has different cabinet committees, including priorities and planning. The priorities and planning, that's the big one. That's the one that's going to be basically doing the strategy. So if Guilbeault's voice is loudly heard there, yeah, that's a problem. I think that, he is a lightning rod as well, because he was so visible during the Trudeau years as his environment minister, and he might not have that role now, but, he still represents, I think, a point of contention for a lot of people who don't like the direction that Trudeau took, and now will not like the direction Carney's taking.
We'll be right back. Were you surprised to see that Calgary didn't wind up with a cabinet minister? I know that they only just had one MP elected, Corey Hogan, and he had some kind of profile. I know he's been involved in podcasting. He worked previously for I believe the Notley government in Alberta. Given that Calgary is kind of at the heart of the conservative movement in Alberta, and also the heart of the energy industry in Alberta, were you surprised that city didn't have a seat at the table?
I was a bit surprised. It's not the only place that was left out, though. In the East as well, Carlos Letao, who is a very well-known former finance minister for Quebec, didn't get a cabinet position at all. That was a shock to a lot of people who are familiar with him. So yeah, I was surprised on that front. I was surprised Calgary didn't get representation, because there's always the common talk that Edmonton doesn't necessarily represent all of Alberta. I'm not going to get into the internecine politics of it, but that's, it's not me saying that. People say it from Alberta. So that again gives the impression by not appointing someone from Calgary, that this is, again, focused on only areas where the Liberals are traditionally strong and where there's more progressive viewpoints that they could draw from.
Looking at the makeup of cabinet in general, were you surprised that some of the faces who were still at the table are at the table? Because some of them were definitely lightning rods for controversy under Justin Trudeau. You know, Melanie Joly's still there, Anita Anand is still there, Stephen Guilbeault, who we mentioned, and Chrystia Freeland still in cabinet. Were you surprised by some of those faces who are still around the table?
So yeah, I was surprised, first of all, to see Chrystia Freeland in the position she was in, again, front bench, and there at all, to be honest, because the night before there was a lot of talk that she wasn't going to be there. I was surprised also Karina Gould, who is seen as an up-and-comer. Yeah, she's more progressive than Carney might like, but she didn't even get a Secretary of State position. She had run against him in the leadership, so some talk about that. I think also, Melanie Joly said something interesting. She was moved to industry from her foreign affairs position, and she talked to Radio-Canada after this happened, and when asked whether it was a demotion, she said, "Oh no, I asked for this." Excuse me? You don't ask. The Prime Minister decides. You don't say, "Hey, I'd like this job, please." So I thought that was a bit of, spin she was making there. She said she wanted an economic portfolio. Well, what does she know about economics? I don't know. I didn't think she was particularly effective as foreign affairs. So I could see why he wouldn't leave her there. But, industry is a huge file. And she's going to also have responsibility for Quebec economic development, which is going to really allow her to get her tentacles into Quebec in terms of, doling out contracts and awarding projects and this kind of thing. So that's what you do with that portfolio or that responsibility. And, that was a bit surprising because it sets her up for future leadership, not to look too far down the road, but you have to. The next leader after Carney will probably come from Quebec. That Liberal Party has a tradition of alternating. And so what does that say to François-Philippe Champagne? How does he feel about that? I mean, he got finance, but now he's not even presenting a budget. So, I mean, that to me, again, like kind of hung Champagne out to dry a little on that one, because coming in as finance minister without a budget, and he was trying to defend it on, I think it was CBC, and he did a really lousy job. It was really, really, he could not. Actually, it was Radio-Canada again. He was in French. It's indefensible. And he was trying by saying it was logical because they were going to present a tax cut and then an economic statement in the fall. Totally illogical, if you ask me. So I think some of the picks, yeah, I was a little surprised. Anita Anand getting foreign affairs too. And then she, mouthed off immediately about the situation in Israel and Gaza and didn't even mention Hamas in her comments. So what surprised me about this is people are freelancing, right? In these roles, they don't have a past in them. And so to let them all freelance on the first day was probably not a good idea. Gregor Robertson also, he's completely new to this picture. And housing, his record on housing is pretty bad in Vancouver. So it's, yeah, I was disappointed, to be honest, in the cabinet choices, the way they rolled out. I thought that there should have been more thought to people and more preparation as well for them on their first day. So they didn't, go out there and do these things.
You mentioned a couple names that you were kind of surprised to see that they're in the positions that they're in. Were there any people who were left out of cabinet who previously had been in cabinet that surprised you, or any other faces that kind of popped up that made you take note as to what this might say about the Carney government?
Well, Nate Erskine-Smith from Toronto is complaining very loudly that he was left out of cabinet. And that is a little surprising. I think it was to make room for another Toronto MP from Scarborough, which is also in the eastern part of Toronto. And that may be why, but Erskine-Smith has a pretty strong reputation in the party, pretty strong constituency. So for him not to be there was a bit of a surprise. There was rumors that Evan Solomon was going to get a cabinet position. The position he got is a ministry that's never existed before, which is AI. That is, what is that? I'm not sure. He's going to have to make something of it. It's not clear how that's going to fit in with things like industry, for example, because, in theory, AI is part of that space is, development of AI for points of business, points of running the government, all these sorts of things. It's how is that ministry going to interact with others? So I wasn't surprised that he got a position, but that ministry is kind of a black box. We don't know what's in it.
Yeah. And lastly, you did mention that the finance minister did talk about not presenting a budget this spring, and we'll see a fall economic update. Why should Canadians worry about that? Or what opportunities is the Carney government missing by not laying out a financial blueprint for this government?
I think it's very deliberate. I think they did it, first of all, because otherwise they'd have to negotiate with the opposition parties to pass it. They are still 2 seats short of a majority, and they may be 3 because Terrebonne is now being contested. So knowing that, they would have had to talk to the NDP or the Bloc. And I don't think they wanted to have the conversation. I think they wanted to just avoid that, go into the summer and do what they want to do. By putting the tax cut front and center, they're saying, well, why would you argue with this? Look how great we are. We're giving you a tax cut on July 1st. Well, how are you paying for that? What are you cutting to make room for that? Their platform in the election, which they argue is going to basically be the budget, had numbers that were not clear. They did not have, like the Conservatives had a page at the end where they basically tabulated everything and showed you the numbers all beside each other. The Liberals, you had to hunt around. There was no, like typically in a budget, you have at the end, you have charts and not graphs, but columns, the numbers. You can add them up and you can see what's minus, what's plus, they had none of that. And so their platform might be their blueprint, but there's no checks and balances here. We have no way to hold them to account for any bottom line because we don't know what it is. And that is just bad. That is, I honestly think it's unacceptable. I, again, was very surprised by that because Carney is a central banker. I understand the politics of it, that they don't want to get into a situation of confidence and dealing with the opposition, but to not have a budget at all, I think it's lazy, to be honest, because what it means is that they're going to run up big deficits this year. No, you're not going to be able to say, like I said, to have any accountability or track anything they do. It's bizarre. It's honestly bizarre. And it does send bad signals. Polyev was talking about it today, saying it sends bad signals to the markets, to investors. It absolutely does. It shows that they're being irresponsible in terms of setting goals and setting benchmarks. And even if those change, even if the tariffs come off and then suddenly that changes the equation, well, you can adjust it in the fall economic statement. But if you haven't put anything down on paper, you're just going off the back of your napkin there. It's like you can just make stuff up. It really, like I said, I think it's irresponsible.
Certainly a shaky start for this cabinet. We'll see if they can steady themselves in the coming weeks. Tasha, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
10-3 is produced by Sean Knox. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Thanks to my guest, Tasha Kheiriddin. More from her at nationalpost.com. I'm Dave Breckenridge. Thanks for listening.